Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Phoenix, Arizona, it's time for Phoenix Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to We All Serve, a podcast series brought to you by the Arizona Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve. Today's focus is on the Arizona National Guard, its missions, and what has been a remarkable year of contributing to the safety and well-being of Arizona citizens and communities. I'm your co-host and moderator, Mike Phillips. I'd like to introduce our other co-host, Dan Irving, the Arizona Director for Esgr. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Mike.
Before introducing our guest, I'd like to again thank Karen Nowicki and Phoenix Business RadioX for their ongoing support of this podcast series. We appreciate the opportunity to tell the Esgr story. And now on to our guest. It's my honor to introduce Major General Michael T. McGuire, who not only serves as the Arizona Adjutant General, but also as the Director of the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. Welcome, General McGuire.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Dan. Good to see both of you.
General McGuire, tell us a little bit about your dual roles with the departments that you manage.
You bet. So the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs is exactly what the title says. We are most analogous on the emergency management side to the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and on the military affairs side, most analogous to the Department of Defense. But as many of you know, the National Guard traces its roots back to 1636 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So every single state has an adjutant general, every single state has a National Guard, and we serve as the primary combat reserve for the United States Army. And subsequent to 1947, with the formation of the Air Force and the formation of the Air National Guard, serve as the primary combat reserve for the United States Air Force. All in, there's just short of 8,300 of your neighbors, your partners at work, in schools, churches that are serving concurrently as members of the National Guard, as well as members of the community. And couldn't be more thankful for their great contributions over the last year. All 8,300 of them pulling really hard on the rope.
Yeah, we're going to get into those remarkable details in a minute. Share with our audience, if you could, a little bit about your military career and how you got to this point.
Well, I'm an F-16 pilot by trade. I was commissioned through the Air Force Academy, graduated in 1987, showed up in Colorado Springs in the summer of 83 for basic training. Served 14 years in the active component. Actually did a tour here in Arizona out at Luke Air Force Base. My mom and dad were actually raised in southern Arizona in Tucson, so it was nice to be back in Arizona for a tour in the early 90s. I separated from the active component after 14 years in active duty in the year 2001 and was direct assigned to a full-time F-16 instructor position down at Tucson at the 162nd Fighter Wing. And served there until in a myriad of capacities as a squadron commander and group commander of the 214th, and did the Predator operations for 1 year, and then was the wing commander of the operation. And subsequent to that, Governor Brewer appointed me to her cabinet back in September of 2013. And I've been serving for nearly 7.5 years in this role now as the Adjutant General, first with Governor Brewer and now for the last 6 years with Governor Ducey.
It's very impressive, and I know the last 11 months have been dominated by efforts to control and understand the COVID-19 pandemic. Arizona National Guard has played a prominent role in that response. Tell us about some of the activities our Guard members have been involved with around the state over the past year or so.
Yeah, so I used to say that Arizona was the best state in the nation. It still is, by the way. But relative to emergency management, we were very disaster averse. No big hurricanes, no big earthquakes. Would occasionally have some floods and wildland fires in the mountainous terrain. But by and large, because of the sparsity of the population, humans derive the need for an emergency response, whether it's being called 911 if you need an ambulance right now or a major disaster. You know, it's kind of be careful what you wish for, living in interesting times. I would say in the last 11 months, we've had our share of response requirements, pandemics, wildland fires. We've had issues at the border, all of which our Guardsmen are involved in. And then over the summer, we had some civil unrest here in Arizona and had to be involved in civil disturbance operations as well. So just in the last 11 months, to give you some idea of the magnitude of effort that's been exerted by our National Guardsmen, not since World War II and the mobilization of the entirety of the National Guard after the declaration of war has a greater percentage of the National Guard been called to duty than in the previous 11 months. Remember that while all this is going on, we have about 2,600 full-time military members that are continuing to build readiness for the hopefully never occurring requirement for us to deploy soldiers or airmen forward into harm's way. We've had as well over 1,300 of them deployed in the last year to overseas locations in the Middle East, the Far East, and other points around the globe. So you add those two factors and couple with at the high point, we had nearly 3,800 guardsmen on duty either for civil unrest, COVID missions, or the border simultaneously. We had over 85% of all of the available personnel that serve in the community called to duty and supporting this great state or nation. And I think what gets lost sometimes is the strain that puts on our employers. So every time I call a guardsman to duty to respond to a situation, the employer that employee is with is skating a man or woman down. And I just want to say to all the employers out there, we are frequently thanked for our service when we're out wandering about. But I want to say thanks to all of them. We could not be the community-based combat reserve of the Army or the Air Force without the support of our employers. And this has been an all whole of community Arizona response. I really appreciate it. It's been a busy year, and I couldn't be prouder of this team.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that, the employers are vital to the success of the Guard and Reserve and the reserve component. We talk about resiliency, individuals. We talk about unit readiness. The employers play that key role by providing the jobs and the security for them to come back so that they don't have to worry about that piece of their resiliency, because they've got a lot of things to worry about. That's one piece they don't. So when I talk to an employer, to me, they are vital to this, and they need to understand that. And a lot of them do. We have some great employers in the state of Arizona. I think we have some of the best that really support our Guard and Reserve. And so far, the employers that I've talked to are willing to let their folks go because they know how important it is for them to go. And it's not just stress on the service member, the employer, but there's also stress on the family. We can't forget that piece too. And those family members work for Arizona employers as well. And we do an awful lot of awards and stuff that we give out from spouses whose member is deployed and their employers work with them for daycare and things like that. And they submit them for Patriot Awards, and we present those Patriot Awards to those companies or those bosses. And it's just a really good way to thank them for their support. But there's a lot of things that we do to do that. But one thing we definitely do is we work to get that cooperation and that understanding between the service members and their civilian employers. And so, like the general said, we've deployed a lot of people, and that puts a lot of stress out there. But GSGR is here to help that. There's things we can do. We have folks that work in other companies out there that can help other smaller companies that may be struggling with service members deployed. We can give them some ideas on how to react to that. Myself, I have a guardsman who we had to lay off for COVID. Started with us for 3 months. We had to lay him off back in March. I've been in contact with him in Kuwait. He's coming back, I think, March, unless the general knows something different. But when he comes back, he's coming back to work for us. So we want him, and you really get the talent, the professionalism, and things like that with military members. So I just want to throw that out. I'm a big advocate for the employers as well as the reserve members. So go ahead.
Well, and Dan, you've seen it from all different perspectives. You're currently an employer. You've had a career in the Arizona National Guard. You use the SGR services. Now you've been the director of Arizona Esgr for some time. Talk about that relationship that develops between a Guard member and its employer. As the General said, we've seen this unprecedented level of activity, and the experience and the training that those Guard members receive and then bring back to the civilian workplace is really kind of priceless. Talk about that element a little bit, of the value that a Guardsman brings to an employer.
Yeah, sure. You know, most of your Guard and Reserve, most of them are drug free. They have to be because they get drug tested, right? That's a big plus for employers. Every employer I talk to just think that's great. I can tell you, I run an FAA repair station, and I can tell you how many people fail the drug test. We can't hire them because they failed or they skip out on us. Chain of command. You hire a Guard or Reserve member, they understand about chain of command, which is something that we're missing in business today. Young folks don't understand chain of command, and it's a big problem out there. They're loyal. They're professional. They've got all the soft skill training. They've got a global perspective on things. Most of them have been overseas in different areas. They're problem solvers, right? I love getting a Guard or Reserve member in because they're problem solvers. They don't come to you and ask, how do you fix this? They fix it. They're decisive. They're leaders. You know, we've got young folks that are responsible at 19, 20 years old, crew chiefs taking airplanes across country. And that's a big responsibility for a 19-year-old. And they make a lot of decisions while they're out there. So the training that these Guard and Reserve members get are outstanding. There's no other organization that trains like they do. So I think that's a big plus. And organizations like to hear this type of stuff. And then what happens is they say, hey, we want to hire all these people. I had a business on the west side, a warehouse. They wanted to hire 100. We want 100 military Guardsmen. Well, you may want to rethink of that, because when they deploy, guess what? You may not have anybody. So we got to be careful with that. And that's what we do when we educate employers. We go in and we do an education. It's free. Don't cost them anything, but we give them a good understanding. We bring them in to meet folks like General McGuire, so General McGuire can speak to them from that perspective. But again, let's go back to General McGuire. And
yeah, General McGuire, what's your perspective on today's Guardsmen and the experiences that they've received over this past year?
I'm extraordinarily deferent to my colleague here, Dan Irving. His former service is my command chief, but I will tell you this about that younger generation. I am constantly inspired by their willingness to serve. You've heard me say multiple times, this is the next greatest generation. They are forced into a time to be out on the streets continuously since 11 months ago. And doing a myriad of missions. I think the other thing for the employers that's important about what's happened during this time is how critical our Guardsmen have been in the response in things that you never see. So if you go back to the beginning in March and April of last year, at the beginning and the initial statewide declaration of the pandemic, the National Guard could not afford to take a healthcare worker who was also a Guardsman and pull he or she out of a hospital and put them on duty. So we had to figure out a way to make a call to action. And our primary line of effort about 10 months ago was about supporting the food chain and making sure that we had food sustainment and all the things under the Emergency Support Function 10 that involves food and water and medication getting to all the communities around the state in the event that our logistics or supply lines were unable to sustain the pace required based on other folks being sick in that industry. So we called in a whole bunch of our logisticians, a whole bunch of our 88 mic truck drivers, a whole bunch of our non-specialty specific soldiers and airmen and said, look, we're going to start covering down. And one of the places we found an early seam was in our food banks. Now, I can tell you, a year ago, I had no idea the role of the food bank and how critical it was in our community. But as people began to increase the demand at the food banks, you were coupled with increased demand, a challenge on getting surplus capacity moved to the food bank, so there's a logistical problem, and then a challenge with labor to get folks in the food banks to do the distribution, because most of the volunteer, nonprofit, and faith-based groups that are in the food banks are typically in the elder population. Great Americans, and the group that I've been focused on since the beginning to focus our primary line of effort, those most at risk, those over 65, and then those in the rural. And at the time, we were very, very busy. Our first basic 911 call came from Tuba City up in Navajo Nation back in April. And so we devised a strategy to try to put our effort there and allow our great healthcare professionals to be the incident command teams at these hospitals, managing those that were critical. And so I'm sure that there are employers out there that are, confused why, I brought my public affairs, one of my public affairs lieutenants with me today, and he's an employee at Boeing. And so Boeing is skating a man down right now, and we're very thankful that Boeing's doing that, but it's not just Boeing. And, there was maybe a silver lining in some of this, as Dan mentioned. As we brought Guardsmen on duty, it allowed us to provide them a full-time occupation in response and to drive down costs for small business employers to not have to cover payroll for those individuals. Now, as we rebuild on the other side, we're going to have to see what the state of the economy is, how many of these businesses come back. But my commitment to the business owners is to always be very upfront with you about our willingness to be collaborative in our needs to meet the needs of the citizens, and as helpful as we can to make sure we're not overstressing you. So that if a business owner, like a healthcare system, says, I just can't let them go. Those that were police and fire and EMT and first response, we didn't call them in. And in our formations, the largest sector of civilian employers is police and fire and first responders. 15% of my total drilling status, those that are part-time National Guardsmen, the largest sector, if you were to break it out, transportation, retail, all the other sectors, the largest sector is actually in police, fire, and first response. It's a natural affinity between the two, military and the rest. And so I can't take all of Tempe's police department on duty and leave none of the police in Tempe. So that was a challenge, as we had to deal in all 15 counties. So to my knowledge, never in the history of the nation have we had a Stafford Act, a major emergency declaration, in this case for a pandemic, where all 50 states and all 50 governors had made a statewide declaration simultaneously. So then that you remember back, a lot of that was about logistics and personal protective equipment and how we could get masks and gowns as we continue to triage that. So I say again, I understand the challenges that our civilian employers are facing. I'm thankful that they've been willing to assist us. They have been very gracious, and there's a lot of people that are struggling right now. My promise to you is when I return these soldiers back, once this mission is complete, and I hope we're getting closer now that we're getting into the vaccination phase, they're going to come back more resilient, more capable, and will hopefully make you more profitable and effective at your industry.
Thank you. Excuse me for those comments. Talk a little bit about how the pandemic unfolded through your eyes. Was it like hitting a wall of needs and requests, or was it slower, and did it build, and just how did you manage that whole process that's really unprecedented in the history of the country?
So, as I mentioned, as it first started, there was you remember that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut were the hardest hit cities early on, or hardest hit states, I should say. And New York City, specifically the largest metropolitan area that was struggling with containment of the disease and the spread of the disease as they mitigated it. We realized early on that it was going to be impossible to contain that from getting here to Arizona, but we did what we could to work on different mitigation strategies. But Dr. Chris and the team over at Health Services, I'm like I said, I'm an F-16 pilot. I'm not a public health doc, so I just wash my hands when told to do that. But I we looked at where we would be able to help sustain the whole of government, whole of community response, less than the actual medical side of it. As I said, most of my medical workers, we left there. So early on, that was our focus. And as I said, it was around mid-April, mid to late April, we got a call. I got a call on a Saturday night about some problems in Tuba City. I reached out to our joint task force and said, hey, it looks like we're going to need to try to use our Black Hawk aviation capability to get some medics in immediately to help triage patients at a small medical facility in Tuba City. And it became obvious that we had some very capable skills in the Guard to quickly triage and sustain what I would call 48 to 72 hours of initial impact, but we don't have the ability to sustain an entire hospital system. So we went up there and we formed a task force aviation, and we basically divided the task force into three specific areas: logistics, aviation, and medical. So the aviation task force primarily worked with rotary wing aviation, although the 161st Air Refueling Wing did a couple of missions to help move equipment for PPE and other major types of equipment to help organically create gowns and masks here in the state. And that aviation task force was critical in getting supplies, equipment, and personnel, test kits, and other things, PPE, out to the rural areas quickly. While we did that, the task force logistics was being stood up because ultimately, for those that have served in the military, they know that the aviation guys can move a lot of stuff very quickly, but we can't move mass amounts of stuff. So we had to start a road network where we were going to do this overground by trucking. And that's where our task force logistics came in to begin a trucking and distribution route to cover gaps again where our commercial vendors needed assistance. So think your FedExes and your UPSs and your major trucking lines. We were just filling gaps and seams that were created. And I remember one vignette down in southern Arizona, because of the slowdown in the economy, we had a number of farmers and ag workers that had excess product that was not going to be brought to market, that they wanted to donate it, but they needed a way to get it to the areas of greatest need in the food banks. So we set up a system for all the excess product to be distributed out of warehouses in Yuma and Santa Cruz County around Nogales to get that product out to the food banks. And at the high point, we were servicing 143 food banks in all 15 counties in the state. That was kind of the persistent nature of what we did until we had a bit of a run up in cases in the late June and early July timeframe, as many of you remember. And at that point, there was no vaccine. So we just continued to try to make sure we reinforced with PPE testing, opening up additional mass testing sites as now the interest in testing became more and more prevalent. And we would assist with that. Health services would ask us, would tell us where they wanted us to try to deploy out, and we would deploy out and get that. And basically, from March until mid-December of this past year, we would manage primarily in logistics and sustainment, some limited aviation, but and on the medical side, doing testing and teaching and training and some planning. The game-changing event recently has been the advent of the arrival of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. So, as you know, the vaccine arrived in mid-December, and it was at that point that our medical task force really picked up the pace. And their first line of effort was to work closely with DHS to figure out how we would qualify to get our healthcare workers vaccinated quickly. DHS put that plan out, and we helped by sending medics and personnel out to each of these drive-through testing sites you see in Maricopa and Pima County, and then gave some planning tips and techniques to the rural counties as the Pfizer vaccine arrived 1 week prior to the Moderna. And the plan was to put the Pfizer vaccine in the two major metropolitan counties because of this critical cold storage, cold chain storage, below -60. So you have to have a special freezer to sustain and maintain that stuff, whereas a Moderna vaccine could be kept in a normal commercial grade freezer, which we knew we could source in any of the 13 rural counties. And then the county emergency managers did what they did do, and they were making great headway. And it became obvious that the pod sites, these point of distribution sites that you hear about, these drive-through sites, were going to be the most effective way to quickly get folks vaccinated. And when the governor asked and directed us to add the over 75s to the group, Dr. Christ and others were able to, we were able to work collaboratively, get Cardinal Stadium stood up as a 24/7 operation. My great emergency management planning team, I mentioned that I do both Army and Air as well as emergency management. They took a planning team in there, an operations team, worked closely with Maricopa County, Cardinal Stadium, Walgreens as the pharmacy provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield as the community provider for the medics that are going to provide the we And in 6 days, they built a capacity that right now is doing over 8,500 vaccinations a day. And we have the capacity, if we get more delivered from the federal government at full speed, to do 10 lanes, 12,000 vaccines a day. And that's really a testament to the team, the health services team, all the folks in the Guard, all our community partners. And now I'll tell you, for the business owners on here, I have a lot of people ask me about how I could volunteer to assist in some of these pod sites around the state. And one of the things I like to do with media is make sure we get that word out that the clearinghouse we're using for that right now is ESAR VIP. It's on the DHS website, there's a tab that says volunteer. And essentially the way it's going is retired doctors, nurses, medics, other folks from nonprofit that might have other skills can sign up to volunteer either individually or as a group, and individually for the medical professionals. And if DHS validates this group as capable, then our medical task force in that teach and train environment is recertifying these retired doctors and nurses, getting them vaccinated and get them out on the front lines to help augment and get our healthcare workers back in the hospital. So I call it my volunteer vaccine brigade. I'm very, very proud of our retired and not currently employed workers. That's why I said at the start, we have earned positions of about 8,209 in the department, but we're pushing up almost over 8,300 now with the amount of volunteer docs, nurses, medics, EMT, and pharmacists that we have working as part of the volunteer force there, and I couldn't be prouder of all of them.
Wow. It's just listening to you describe the response to COVID and all the different hot spots that you managed over the past 11 months. You're kind of in awe of the logistics of managing all the personnel, all the equipment, getting it where it needs to be. Talk a little bit about that team that's doing that. Who is that?
So, yeah, I say all the time, I don't do anything but come out and say, sign up to be a volunteer. We have a great team, right? We have a Joint Task Force Arizona, so we're structured under our Commander-in-Chief, Governor Ducey, where I am the commanding general and the military ADCON, OPCON, TACON element for all of the guardsmen in the state, as well as the civilian employees in emergency management. But a direct report to Governor Ducey. And then because of that role, we have a joint task force, just like we would have a joint task force if we're deployed on any other mission. And that's currently led by Brigadier General Troy Daniels. And then I have an Army, as I mentioned, an Army and Air National Guard component. In the Air National Guard, I have a wing here at the 161st at Sky Harbor, a KC-135 wing. Everybody that flies in and out of Sky Harbor sees those gray aircraft on the south side of the runway all the time. And then from where I came, the 162nd Fighter Wing down in Tucson operates out of the International Airport, and that's an F-16 training unit. All in, there's about 2,900 airmen in the Air National Guard. And then the Army Guard is run by Brigadier General Rich Baldwin, and he has basically 3 subordinate brigade commands, major brigade commands, an aviation troop command, a maneuver enhancement brigade, and a sustainment brigade called a regional support group, has similar sustainment functions. And those organizations have provided the soldiers and airmen to General Daniels' task force. So they're, as I said, primarily organized logistics, aviation, medical. And so they do the operational execution of the mission. The force providers are the Army and Air National Guard of Arizona. And then we try to balance the readiness of the force to meet other needs. As I said, not all at the same time, but over the last year, about 1,300 of our Guardsmen dedicated to other active component missions. So we're constantly moving people around off of one mission onto another. Additionally, we had 704 of our Guardsmen assigned to the border, Customs and Border Protection, in support of their efforts up and through October 1st of this last year. And that mission was taken over by a Title 10 element to relieve our guys to bring them back to state so I could use them for other things.
It's remarkable. You mentioned the 161st and the 162nd, and on top of all these reactive things that are going on the past year, you still have core missions, right? Can you just talk a little bit about what the 162nd does and the 161st does on a day-to-day basis, what their missions are?
Sure. So the 161st is an operational tanker wing. They do global mobility and strategic deterrent mission. So they're part of the nuclear triad and the enterprise that has provided a nuclear deterrent for this nation dating back to the 1950s. They additionally are part of the mobility air forces that move, transport, and refuel our aircraft from all services and all components, not just in Arizona, but around the globe. And because of their location here in Arizona, they're the most heavily tasked tanker unit in the nation because of the demand from Luke Air Force Base, Davis-Monthan, the fighter unit at the 162nd, our guard unit there, and the Yuma Marine Corps Air Station. Just literally hundreds and hundreds of users that they're servicing for their air refueling training as well. So an operational mission, very, very busy, and a central point and critical to the support and sustainment of all the things that we do. Down south, the 162nd is the largest fighter wing in the Air National Guard. I also like to call it the United Nations of the F-16 training world. They have 29 countries that they train foreign F-16 pilots as well as our own U.S. pilots. They put them through a training regimen post initial pilot training prior to arriving at their operational unit in their home country or in the U.S. And they run a myriad of different training programs, have 84 F-16s down there, as well as they are the unit tasked with Southwestern Air Defense Alert post 9/11. So they sit alert and cover the southwestern sector of the United States from airborne threats. So all in, as I said, about 2,900 airmen. Arizona is the fifth largest of the states and territories in terms of total Air Guard strength. So we're very strong on the Air Guard side in terms of total manpower and end strength. We're 37th in Army Guard strength with just over 5,600 soldiers. But you can see the Army outnumbers the Air Force in the broader picture, 3.5 to 1. So the Army is the force of mass, and they are the ones that deliver the mass. Like I said, this overground transportation, the ability to provide a whole lot of medics, the ability to provide a lot of personnel. So really, the Army provides the lion's share of the labor force to most of our responses.
Do we have guard units in all 15 counties?
We have guardsmen that have homes of record in all 15 counties. We do not have armories or drilling locations in all 15 counties. We have 29 locations around the state. I would have to quickly do a poll in my head here of which county. We do not have any drilling sites in Greenlee County, in Apache County, right now in Mojave County.
But most counties.
But yeah, I'd say no less than 9, no more than 12, somewhere in there. But I'd have to look at a map to confirm that.
Gotcha. Dan, one of the really cool things about ESGR is it helps publicize the mission of the Guard and what the Guardsmen are doing. We want to talk a little bit about the boss lifts and the different outreach practices that ESGR does to kind of boost awareness of what the Guard does.
Sure. And let me go back to what General was talking about. When you look at how many people, how many citizen soldiers have been mobilized for this crisis, you got to reach out and thank those employers, because remember, without those employers, we wouldn't be ready. They're letting them go to take care of this crisis puts them in a disadvantage of stress, but they're letting them go. And this is great. And we've reached out to a lot of them that understand this. And we do this through several different ways, right? One of the things we always say is we all serve, right? And I've heard General McGuire say this more than one occasion. We all serve. We serve in different capacities, right? Well, the employers are serving. They're serving in a different capacity by supporting those guard and reserve members to go take care of their military commitment. They know it's important. They understand it. And that's what we do. We try to get out. We reach out to employers to get them to understand that. One of the things we do is boss lifts. We bring them out to the unit. We give them a mission brief. We want them to see what their Guard and Reserve members do when they're not with them at their place of business. This is how they train. This is what they do. We take them up on a KC-135 or a helicopter, and they actually get a chance to see what the mission brief looks like. They go up, and they get a better understanding of what their service members are doing when they're drilling or when they're doing their training or when they're mobilized, okay? We want that. We bring them into breakfast with the bosses. Of course, with COVID, we've kind of had to put all that on hold this year, but we like to bring them in. We usually do about 16 or 17 of these breakfasts with the bosses where we actually bring in General McGuire, some of the generals, some of the commanding officers, some of the top enlisted, and just let them talk to the group and the group of employees, and just to give them a better understanding. We also we resolve problems between service members and employers, and that's a free service. We go in. We're very successful here in the state of Arizona. We don't have a lot of problems, but when we do have a problem, we're usually about 90% can fix it. It's usually just a misunderstanding, and it's done very easily. So we really have some great employers. I have to stress that in the state of Arizona. But I'd like to ask General McGuire. General, you and I have talked several times about how ESGR can better maybe serve our service members or our employers. Could you just kind of touch on that a little bit, what you think maybe we can do better?
Well, I don't think the employers can do any better than they are right now. I'm very proud of what they've done. I said earlier that I feel embarrassed at times for people saying thanks for my service because I know the level of sacrifice all of our citizens are making today, and I want to thank the employers for that. Relative to that, ESGR is a federally recognized and the formal support organization for our Guard and Reserve members. So for those employers that are not members of ESGR, but they have guardsmen or women in their unit that are serving or may serve in the future, we would love to have a robust membership of businesses in that regard, because the broader the base, the more effective we are in advocating if there are things that are deficiencies in law, protecting our soldiers and airmen when they go back and forth from their civilian and military duties. In terms of what I think we all need to be focusing on now, not just in the Guard, is that you remember the start of the story about what happened was we lost our volunteer force at the food banks. And what I would say is, as we rapidly, and I say rapidly, that's our anticipation, increase the immunity of our community, that rhymes, to COVID-19, we need to get those volunteer groups back into those organizations so we can return to normalcy. We have forgotten, I think, how critical civic engagement and public volunteering is to get things done in the normal function of our communities. And so the food banks, whether there's other areas that we're covering down on, certainly the trucking industry is fully robust, and the logistics requirement there has dropped significantly. The excess capacity issue with food has been dealt with. We'll see what happens during the next harvest season here. But I would say it's really about employers bringing their employees back into the fold and figuring out if they have a adopt a highway group or a work at a food bank day or whatever. We really need to start repopulating the schedule that way, because I do need to return these guardsmen to their civilian employers so that they can get the economy fired back up again. And so I really need that. It's kind of we need each other here. You know, we've triaged this. I've used that term before. We are now in the recovery phase. We are accelerating vaccinations, and we need to return to a sense of normalcy with those groups as quickly as possible, and the employers are a big part of that. So couldn't be prouder of how they've handled the last year, and as we go forward, I'd ask them to lead by example. Dan made the comment that I say all the time, I'm no more or less important than any other member of my team. I just have a different set of duties, authorities, and responsibilities. I'm no more or less important. I just have a different set of duties, authorities, and responsibilities. And one of those is to lead by example and to set the pace for how we're going to behave as an organization. And we need to do that as well, getting our folks back into their employers and getting them back into these community-based organizations on a volunteer basis.
Yeah, great point. And I want to thank you for taking the time out this morning. I know you got a lot on your plate every day, but to share the story of the Guard, what's been taking place the last 11 months, and really our thanks go out to all the Guard members who've been out there on the front lines and making a difference. And it really is, we use that word community a lot, but the relationship between employers, ESGR, the Guard and Reserve, the healthcare community. I mean, this is a reflection and a description of what true community is. So thank you so much for what you've been doing. And thank you again, Karen and Phoenix Business RadioX, for the opportunity to talk about our stories.